Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we're going to talk about the very first PQ that happened for set 3. This happened in Bologna. I think there were supposed to be a PQ in set 2 in Bologna, but it got moved because of some flood, if I'm not mistaken. So this is the first PQ that we have for set 3, and I think this is the only PQ that's going to happen before the holidays. So obviously, it was 127 players, so almost maximum capacity in terms of the amount of players. So it is a relatively, obviously, a pretty big tournament, so there's probably a lot of things we can learn from it. So let's dive into it. First of all, we'll talk about the metagame breakdown. We don't have any percentage, but we have the numbers of decks. We saw that the most represented deck, so out of the 126 players, there were one unknown deck list, so maybe someone, so I don't know what happened there, but anyway, we got the most represented deck was Sabine Green. 24 players playing Sabine Green, which is, I think it's a little bit surprising in the sense that there's almost twice more Sabine players, and there's the second most represented deck list, which is a Bossk Blue at 12. So this is like pretty big. So it's like if we compare to 126, we're pretty much looking at more than 30% of the meta being of Sabine Green, which is a lot. Sabine Green is definitely a very powerful deck and a force to be reckoned with. It does well across the board. Doesn't do great against Django, but there's a couple of things you can adjust in the deck list to make the deck a little bit better and bring it closer to a 50-50. So it's a very, very strong deck. So not a surprise that it sees, in my opinion, is one of the easily the top 5 best deck in the game. So not surprised to see him perform. So second most represented deck was Bossk Blue with 12 people playing Bossk Blue. Obviously, I have probably a responsibility on this since of course I won Birmingham with Bossk. Bossk is a deck that's very well positioned in the meta, so it's not a surprise to see a lot of people picking up the deck. Especially in Europe, where I know that historically people have been liking control decks more than in the US. Then the third most represented deck, without surprise, is Django Red. Django Talking Town with 10 people. Talking Town, Django is still, in my opinion, one of the strongest decks in the game, but it is on the radar on the radar of absolutely everybody, which definitely is a limitation for the deck. Fourth most represented deck is between Anakin Blue, which is still showing strong even though it fell off compared to Birmingham, as you can expect since the deck did not perform very well. But we also have 6 Ray Talking Town, which is another kind of flavor never mind. Actually, the fourth most played deck is actually Han Solo Yellow here, which you see 9 people playing Han Solo Yellow. Also not a surprise, it's a deck that doesn't do, it's a very strong deck overall. It got a lot of strong upgrades from set 3. It was already a pretty strong deck in set 2, and it's a deck that does very well against Bossk. So in a meta where Bossk is the second most played deck, it makes sense to be playing Han Yellow. And then after this we got, as we said earlier, 6 people playing Ray Blue and 6 people playing Anakin Blue, which is the mid-range blue-white deck, which have been quite popular. We saw the Anakin Blue winning the tournament. What was the name of the tournament? No, he didn't win, but he went second place on the Scandinavian tournament. I forgot the name. So yeah, it's a well-rounded deck, even though it didn't do very well in Birmingham. But this time we're seeing people kind of going away from Anakin and going to Ray. I think Ray and Anakin are really the 2 most popular options for blue, white, red deck. Since Young Han is just very poorly positioned, there's just too many people playing Talking Town. So this is pretty much the meta, and then after this is fairly balanced. As you can see here, we see a lot of things. We see some Vader Green, sorry. Interesting. Essentially, Palpatine Blue still showing a little bit. So still people trying out the deck and trying to make it work. And we saw some Kira Green as usual. And actually Yoda Blue is also quite represented with 5 decks playing Yoda Blue. Yoda Blue is very strong into Django Red. And it's a deck that has a few strong assets to show up. So And let's take a look at the top 8. So I'm not going to reveal the top 8, I'm just going to go there just bit by bit just to maintain the suspense. First of all, we got, as not a surprise, one of the person who managed to make top 8 was, of course, one of the Sabine Green. This particular version is very similar to the one, so this is a pretty classic version that runs 3 Dark Sabers in the main deck. So it's like a pretty classic version. Interestingly enough, that he doesn't play the X-Wing, the Alliance X-Wing, and instead decides to go for Ketsu Onyo. So this is a little bit unusual, a bit more ground-based and less space units on the early game. But then the rest of the deck is very much what you would expect. So we can move on here to the second list. This is another Sabine Green. This one is a lot more similar to the one that Al was playing in Birmingham, but you can call me Al, went undefeated 8-0 in Birmingham with a Sabine Green that very much looked like this, with the R2, with the Spectral Soldiers, the full package of Metal Ceremonies and Rebel Assault, the full package of Bryo in the main deck to deal with the Django Red, and also the full package of Yularen. So a deck that is kind of like go wide strategy that was pretty successful for Al in this matchup, and has been successful for this person as well. I'm sorry, I don't have any names, so I'm so sorry if I can't say the name of anybody. If you are one of those players, just give me a shout out in the comments, and that'll be great. And as you can see here, yeah, pretty much a much more like kind of new school version of the Sabine Green. With the Dark Sabers in the sideboard, because it's very bad into Django, so a little bit more kind of anti-Django focus, I would say. Pretty cool, and obviously 100% chance of hits on the 4 cards, I believe, in the main deck, which is kind of neat. Then, still in our top 8, we got a Ray Tarkin Town, which is pretty much what you would expect from a mail. Look, a lot of different cards here, a lot of variety of cards. But in the content, it's pretty much what you would expect. Only the most important cards are 3 ofs, and I completely agree that 3 Village Protectors, 3 Concordant Interceptor, 3 Luke Skywalker, Luke Skywalker, and 3 Fourth Throws are kind of like the essentials of the metas that you kind of have to have, because we are in a very aggressive meta. And I think Rey is a very solid option. The Restore 3 is still massive. The +1/+1 experience on those Concordant Interceptors, on those Village Protectors are very, very impactful. Also plays the Moisture Farmers as well, that can be boosted with Rey, with very solid card as well. As you can see, no card from set 3 in this main deck outside of the Perilous Position. The sideboard, there's a couple of interesting things. We notably see the Captain Typho, we see 3 of them. Not really sure what you would play Captain Typho over, because give a unit Sentinel. I guess you can give another unit Sentinels, but I would personally much rather, even if you're looking for more like Sentinels, I feel like there's just much better options. But outside of this really odd card, which I would be very interested to know what this is showing up in the sideboard, the rest of the sideboard is pretty much what you would expect here. Mostly anti-control stuff, with additional copies of Tex, 2 additional copies of Cray Dragon, some Felder Dragon and stuff. So yeah, pretty solid version. Also would like to notice the Razor Crest. Despite playing almost no upgrade, it turns out that, and he's playing the 3 Perilous Position, I guess, which has made Razor Crest basically better as a card, because Perilous Position, now that everybody plays like 2 or 3 copies of Perilous Position in every blue deck, it does make Razor Crest a better card. But even without this, just a 3/4 Restore 2 for 4 is just a very solid card, in my opinion. So Razor Crest, you're showing more and more into people's sideboard, into people's deck. Last top 8, last but not least, we got this really crazy and extremely innovative Chancellor Palpatine's Red. So most people, including me, have been kind of considering Palpatine to be a control leader, and the reason for this is because as the game not having a leader deploy in an aggro in an aggro deck is just too much of a downside. And even though Palpatine does have a few cool things going on as an aggro archetype, obviously he's cunning, so that helps. It's by nature just pretty aggro. He obviously deals direct damage to base on his dark side, whenever dark side to light side. He puts units on the board. So it is definitely a leader that can be played at a control and as an aggro. And I really, before I started basically putting this video together, I really wanted to see this deck play out to have a better grasp on what this player wants to do with this deck. So I watched the game that he won against Bossk in the last round of Swiss, and the games that he lost to Sabine. So the games against Bossk, I think, were very close. I think the Bossk player did not draw the ideal cards. I think that this deck suffers a lot against stuff like the client, that kind of thing. You didn't see any early client from the Bossk player, notably. That also obviously kind of like I think that the matchup would have been much easier. But it turns out that I think that Palpatine's ability really shines. Palpatine as a leader really shines against control, because against control, the control player kind of has to deal with your white units. It makes it very easy to flip it on the other side, and therefore to flip it back and forth and get a lot of value that way. So the deck is an almost all space deck. So it's pretty much, imagine Jango Fett, but instead of like fire spray and a couple of like ways to ping the opponent and stuff, you're just playing a bunch of white cards that are very strong. You get access to Red 3, A-Wing, a bunch of really strong space units, which is and obviously Falcon, which is a very big deal. So you basically have a deck that is kind of like very, very space heavy, that is very reminiscent. This deck plays like a Django deck, and it does also play against like a Django deck, like a Django red deck. You still have the triple dark raid into Ruthless Raiders and all that, which is kind of cool. So obviously this deck is, in my opinion, so there's a couple of things to keep in mind. So I think against control, this deck might be better than Django Red, because yes, you don't have a leader deploy, but the leader most likely is going to get blocked by like a big child send or anything. One of the advantages of this is like, what sometimes can be a little bit awkward with Django whenever you're playing a Django space deck, is that Django is literally one of the few cards in your deck that is a land unit. So you play him and he just gets killed right away because he's get killed or he gets blocked. So basically the Django deploy is not super impactful. So since the Django deploy is not super impactful, why not instead play a leader that doesn't deploy but gives you much more value and allow you to play better cards in your deck? And that's why you play Palpatine. So granted, there's some give and takes. You can't play Fire Spray, which is a massive, massive deal. But you do have access to Falcon. You do have access to a bunch of other really cool cards. Also, Heroic Sacrifice is very strong with Ruthless Raiders. So this Palpatine allows you to have those very unlikely combinations of cards, which normally you wouldn't be able to play together really well. But here you can just do that. And that's very nice. So notably, what is very cool about this is that, yeah, I don't have a leader deploy, but that's fine because because Django is not really that good anyway, and at least I can just go flipping back and forth with Palpatine all the time and generate tons of value. And that can be, in certain matchup, more impactful than Django. So the way I see this deck is kind of saying, okay, I'm probably going to be worse against aggro because I don't have the ability to tap down the enemy units using my Django's ability, which I think is super, super strong against aggro. However, against control decks like Bossk, I'm going to be much better off with my Palpatine because I don't have the tap ability in the control matchup. It's not really that big of a deal. However, I do get this tremendous amount of value with Palpatine going back and forth. So this is definitely a very, very interesting take on the Palpatine deck. So if you compare this to a Palpatine Blue, yes, Palpatine Blue will be able to flip more often because games will be longer, but basically Palpatine Red doesn't flip as often because games are shorter. However, it does flip more often because it's going to be playing a lot more white units, and there's going to be a lot more pressure for the opponent to kill those white units because you are putting so much pressure. So basically, let's say I play Ketsu on your turn 1, even I play like any kind of white units on turn 1. If I'm playing Palpatine blue, my opponent can simply just ignore it, so then I don't get to flip. While if you're playing Palpatine red, you kind of have to kill the unit because otherwise you're going to take a million damage. So there's definitely this part of the deck which I think is very interesting. If you wonder what the phase 2 Clone Trooper is here, it is basically gives you a way to flip, especially in the aggro mirror, where basically people are not going to be just killing your units, just going to be ignoring your units. Phase 2 Clone Trooper gives you a way to kill the opponent enemy units, and which gives you a way to flip your leader, which is very cool. So overall, I think there's a chance for this deck that this deck might just be better than Django Red, again, specifically against Hard Control. With that being said, Hard Control is only one deck at the moment, Bossk, which does see significant amount of play, but it's not like crazy. So it is, and the downside is that you're basically worse against, I would say, pretty much everything else. I think that Django is probably just a better leader in probably most of the other matchups. Once again, I've never played this Palpatine red deck, but this is kind of like my observation. So if you're really expecting Hard Control to see a lot of play, maybe playing this over Django red might be a good idea. So this is the good thing I have to say about the deck. Now let's talk about the bad things. The things, my opinion, that I think the deck that this problem is going to have. The first problem is obviously the aggro mirror. If you're fighting against aggro mirror, then suddenly not having access to, you're not going to be able to flip Palpatine as often because your opponent most likely will just basically ignore you. And that's pretty much going to be the case on the ground-based aggro decks like Sabine. So that's going to be a major problem, because you're not be able to flip Palpatine as often. If you can't flip Palpatine as often, then suddenly you're playing without a leader. And it also means that sometimes you're going to be stuck with those black cards you didn't get to play. So that's a really big problem. And you don't have the tap ability of Django that is just so useful against Sabine. So yes, you're making your Bossk matchup better, but you might be making your Django matchup a lot better. Your Palpatine matchup a lot worse. So your Sabine matchup a lot worse. So there's that. Another interesting things as well is that obviously there's going to be some consistency issue with this deck. I think, for example, I see the triple Dark Raid has only one great target with his with Ruthless Raider. Obviously, you can triple Dark Raid into the tank. The pressure of the tank can be nice, but then that means you're going to have to play it on. You need to play it on 5 if you want to make this happen. So if you're playing triple Dark Raid on 4, which is the ideal moment you want to play triple Dark Raid, then the real good target you have is Ruthless Raider. Then the other targets are kind of meh. So triple Dark Raid is definitely a lot weaker in this deck than it is in the Django deck, and also has chances to whiffs or to just find pretty much nothing, which is kind of a problem. Another thing as well is, obviously, so I was talking about earlier, the consistency. It's sometimes you might be able to be on one side, you might be able to want to be on the other side, that kind of thing. That can be super annoying. So there's a couple of things with this version that makes me a little bit cautious about whether this is going to be a deck that we're going to see a lot of play in the future. But yeah, I think, obviously, congratulations for the person to build that deck. Once again, I don't have any names. Because this is definitely a very innovative deck, and it is definitely a different take on the Palpatine deck, which I think is promising. I just think that overall, I don't see this deck being. I think the thing is like the card that people have to deal with Django are also going to work against this deck. So you're basically not really taking the meta by surprise, because people are gonna have the same sideboard card they're gonna side against Palpatine, against Django, they're going to side in against you. And also, I think as people are going to be learning how to play against Palpatine, there's definitely some certain line of play that you have to be very aware of as Palpatine, and also this is something that might make the deck suffer in the future, is like, are people going to be able to understand? Are people going to be able to adapt to this new deck and kind of like play against it a little bit better? And this also is going to make the deck fall off a little bit. So I think this is a really cool idea for the specific meta, especially where there was a lot of Bossk. So things work out pretty well for it. I think this deck is strong, but I don't think. I think it's very counterable, and I think it is overall weaker than Django. That's obviously my first assumption, not having played against it or played with it, but that's kind of like my first kind of impression of, as I'm looking at the deck, trying to think about what are the upsides and downsides. And I did saw the 2 games that he played with. So obviously, if that person has some additional insight about his deck, he's feel free to say it in the comments below and let us know what you think, and let me know also if my analysis is accurate or not. We're getting into the top 4 here, and we got a Boss Blue. Considering the amount of Boss Blue that were in the tournaments, it's not a surprise that we are seeing at least one making a top 8. Pretty much the only difference with my version is like he's basically replacing the Vanquish by Rival's Fall. This could be smart in a meta if you're expecting a lot of Anakin, stuff like this. Rival's Fall can sometimes be better. I was playing Vanquish as basically a more efficient answer against Raider. He's also playing 51 cards, I believe, and he's not playing the restock in the main deck and play True Krayt Dragon, which I personally strongly disagree with, especially in the meta where he was expecting a lot of Boss Blue. Having the restock in the main deck is just so good in this matchup, especially since you're not even sure if the game 2 is going to matter, because time might be called by the game 2, and even if you win game 2, if you're on 1-1, then it does the game the draw is gonna come down. This is why any like super important anti-control card, I like to have them in the main deck instead of them in the sideboard, because time is very much a consideration. So yeah, overall, other than this, it's very much just the same deck. That he's playing a couple of interesting cards. He's playing Imprisoned in the sideboard. I don't know exactly in what matchup you would want this. The Ruthless Raider in the sideboard is also probably for the, I would say, against Bossk. I think this card is very good in the mirror match, and it actually might be kind of a decent card against Django. I think against Django, because there's so many 2 health units, comes to play, kill something, whatever, that can be quite nice. So yeah, this actually might be this card might be better positioned in the meta than I forgot the name, Gar-Saxon Gauntlet. This might just be better positioned than Gar-Saxon Gauntlet in the current meta. So yeah, the rest of the thing makes sense. And that's pretty much this Boss Blue deck. Then we go into a top 4, and then we see my favorite deck. It's been a very, very long time since we've seen a Han Green, making it a top 8 results in tournaments. For the most part, people basically replaced Han Green by Han Yellow. I think Han Green... Okay, so this version of Han Green makes a lot of sense to me. Honestly, if I was going to put together a Han Green list, it would probably look something like that. So what are the advantages of playing Han Green over Han Yellow? So Han Yellow is probably... I think Han Green is better against control. Because, yes, you don't play DJ on 7, but you get access to U-Wing Reinforcements and Home 1, and those 2 cards are like super big in the matchup. So those 2 cards, you basically, you're playing less Discardia, you're not playing Body Rook, and you can't play DJ on 7. But I think the U-Wing Reinforcement and Home 1 makes the matchup overall better. So I think Han Green, if you're able to find resupply, Han Green is one of the strongest deck in the game. Like, it's a very, very powerful deck with resupply. Without resupply, the deck is a lot weaker. So that's the thing. So it has this kind of like this kind of paradox that makes it so. I'm personally not a big fan of Han Green in the current meta, Han Green. And one of the main reasons is because I believe the deck it's the deck that wants to play the late game. We see a lot of late game shenanigans, U-Wing Reinforcement, Home 1, and all that stuff. But it doesn't have many ways to deal with late game threats. Basically here, as you can see, the only late game threat that you can deal with is Waylay. So it's a deck that is very, very weak to pretty much all the green-black decks. So if you're playing against Palpatine, Kira, Krennic, all those decks, this deck will suffer a lot against those decks. It's also a deck that doesn't do super well against aggro. With that being said, this specific version I think is relatively well equipped against aggro because he plays the Cloud Riders, he plays the Echo-based Defenders, full package of Bright Hove, also play the Plo Koon and the Marauders, which are both great against aggro. So he's relatively well equipped. It's definitely an anti-aggro focused version of the deck. And it looks like that this was a great meta call for this Han Green, because you can see not many Palpatine here, only 7 Palpatines, all versions mixed together. They were 4 Darth Vader green though. That's very bad matchup for him. And then there is the Ident. So sorry, there's the Kira green, 4 Kira green. So if you're able to dodge those very problematic matchups, then the deck becomes like very, very strong in the meta. If you're playing into a lot of Bossk, I think this could be very good. Nice to see the Marauders see him play. I personally would prefer to play Azikut Gunship. I think it's just a better positioned than the Marauders, but decided to play the Marauders and then plays Azikut in the sideboard. Okay, so it's pretty cool. I think, in my opinion, if you want to run a Han Green, this is probably as good as it gets. It's probably the best version I've seen. It's very well built. So I encourage you to give this a try. As I said, I'm not... so I definitely might give it another try. This, as you know, it's one of my favorite deck. It's my baby. It's a deck I played the most in set 1. So I might give this a second try and see how it pairs in the current meta. I just think the deck just a little bit too weak against aggro, and the weakness to ramp green-black decks is just a very big problem as well for the deck. So moving on to the first finalist, we have Gyama, a third Sabine green player. So 3 Sabine in the top 8, so that's pretty great. But to be fair, they were about 30% of the meta being out of Sabine, so it's not a surprise to see Sabine doing well when you see so many people playing it. And fairly standard version here. Couple of Dark Sabers in the main, couple of time interventions. Pretty much as close as it gets. You get the Dodonna, which will probably serve him very well in the mirror match. So yeah, not much to say. Pretty classic version. And then we get into the winner with Cad Bane Tarkin Town. So Cad Bane fell off very, very hard. As you can see, only 3 people run Tarkin Town, even though Red Tarkin Town did very well in Birmingham. It's really surprising to see so few people running Cad Bane Red. And I think one of the reasons is because, as you know, the deck struggles really hard against Bossk. And obviously, considering the amount of people that were playing Bossk, it's not a surprise to see that a lot of people decided to not breed Cad Bane. But turns out, Cad Bane managed to squeeze himself into a win. I wonder how many Bossk he encountered. Maybe he didn't encounter any Bossk. And I think if you are going to be dodging the hard control decks or the Palpatines, Cad Bane is very well positioned, because it's a very strong against aggro and it's very strong against mid-range. So if you're expecting a meta that doesn't play a lot of control and plays a lot of mid-range and aggro, then this deck is very strong. Once again, we don't have any insight on what kind of deck those guys met. We don't have any stats compared to, because it was the tournament was run on melee, it was not run on limitless. So obviously we have limited insight on exactly what happened there, but definitely it's a deck that has some strong weaknesses, yes, but also has enormous strength. So this specific version here is relatively standard. He's not running any TIE Phantoms in the main deck, which is a bit surprising, because if there's one way you can kind of like get sort of like free wins against hard control, it is thanks to the TIE Phantoms. Sometimes you can get, if you manage to dodge the -2/-2s, which in the main deck, the Bossk is only going to be running 3 -2, and if you get just 2 attacks with the TIE Phantoms, that's already 8 damage for free. That's already massive. Even if you get into a Snoke, you still dealt a tremendous amount of damage. So it's a little bit surprising to not see him run any in the main deck. He's also running the Shoot First in the main deck, which is also interesting. But yeah, the rest of the deck is pretty classic here. It's probably just to go with the Jabba package. So this is a very cool deck. It's the only deck that really runs, now there's 2 of them well. It's Jabba the Hutt is just such a cool card. I'm super glad that this card is finally seeing some competitive play. Tons of ambush here. It's just a deck that's very strong against aggro. It has a lot of sweet interactions, sweet combos. So it's a very solid deck that you know and love from Birmingham, and nice to see him taking the win here. So congratulations to those players for making the top 8 and the winner for taking it all. So relatively diverse top 8. I think obviously the massive surprise of this top 8 is the complete lack of Django. So Django is the third most represented deck here, and not a single Django managed to make it at the top 8. So I would like to see, once again, we have very limited insight. What is the win percentage of the Django decks in general in this tournament? What did they struggle? This is tons of question that we wish we could have an answer to it, but unfortunately here we won't be able to see it. If you want to check out the coverage of the tournament, there is a video that covers a lot of stuff. It's all in Italian. But you can just watch the game, and that's just very enjoyable anyway. So I personally did watch the game with Palpatine Red just because I was curious to see how the deck ran. So yeah, for pretty exciting. I think this meta is keeps on giving some cool stuff. Some people might be a little bit scared for Sabine to dominate, but as you can see, it's not a surprise to see 3 Sabine deck because the deck was super represented, almost over more than 30% of the meta. Yeah, with 24 participation, it's almost 30%, I would say, of the meta. That's significant. So it's not a surprise to see it do well. And the only big surprise here is the Django Red not performing, not doing particularly great. I have no idea what that's the case. There could be a number of reasons, and unfortunately, the information that I have is not enough to draw any conclusion on the reason why Django Red did not perform particularly well in this tournament. Maybe the Bossk basically kept the Django Red from being able to perform. We know that Bossk has a very good matchup against Django Red, and Bossk being the second most played deck, this could be one of the reasons that prevented Django from getting into the top tables. Thank you so much for following that video, and I would like to thank the person who is in charge of the Star Wars Unlimited competitive hub. If you don't know this website is fantastic to get information about. Basically, in one place you get all the information of all the upcoming tournament that happens. So it's really nice to have everything in one place. You get the deck list right down here, that you get the link of SUDB that you can click over, you have the coverage, you get the metagame breakdown, and you even get a nice little pictures of the winners here, so that's very nice. So yeah, it's just really great, so I really encourage you. I'll put the link of the website on the description of the video. Thank you so much for following that video, and I'll see you next time. Please, if you like this kind of content, like and subscribe, and bye-bye.